What's going on, guys? This is Tech 360. Today I'm going to show you how to replace a vacuum breaker in a toto valve. Alright guys, first and foremost, if you clicked on that video, make sure you like and subscribe. Let's get into it. So this is a concealed valve, which basically is a valve that is hidden and usually goes in the wall. These aren't usually exposed where people can see them. Basically how these are usually set up is you have a water supply that comes in here on the side and it feeds water in, and this goes down into the toilet, which helps flush. All right. This over here, like this in general, is just an old valve. This is a generator. This is what charges. There's a whole module that sits up here, and it goes in there and it helps recharge the battery inside the module, and it also has a button and sensor and all that stuff like that, right? The top has, this is basically what determines basically from a urinal to a toilet, which is the parts on the inside. Basically, it's just the flush time and how much water it allows to flow, right? So what ends up happening though is right in here you have a vacuum breaker. Now basically all this does is just keeps basically keeps from siphoning and then water going back in the wrong direction it shouldn't go, in short. And so when they go bad, what ends up happening is you get water that when you go to flush, you hit water that sprays out right in here, right? Because there's little vents right in here, and it'll spray out either when it stops flushing or as you're flushing, it'll pour out. That is a sign that your vacuum breaker has gone bad and it has failed, and it's time to replace. So I'm going to show you how to do it. It's very simple. It takes a little time sometimes, depending on the situation, how it's mounted, and how accessible it is. But all in all, it's a simple repair, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer, and we're going to get into it. All right, so once you get to the valve, you're going to do just a couple steps here, okay? So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to loosen up your line here. So you're going to make sure the water is off, because you don't want to loosen this up with the water on. So you're going to want to loosen this up, and basically you don't want to take it off, but you just want to loosen it up to where it can kind of wiggle around freely, and there's a reason for it. So what you're going to do is that once you do that, you're going to get your pair of pliers. You can either use something like these, or there's a set of pliers that are designed for these, which are these guys right here, which is a goofy set, but it's good for little small tight spaces like this, so you know whatever you may be in. So then you're going to loosen it up, all right? And I'm going to try to make it seem like it's in the wall, kind of like what we deal with here. So you're going to loosen it up, keep on loosening, and you're going to let the ring drop like that. You see all these louvers? This is where the air is supposed to escape, and basically water escapes from as well when your vacuum breaker goes bad. So what's going to end up happening now is, now that you've got this loose, that gives you a little bit now where you can kind of pick up just a smidge, and then you can turn the valve backwards like this. And what that does is it gives you room to mess with this. Okay, so now let's just say this is still hanging there, even though it's not. So then what you can do is you can tilt this either way in the wall. I think you can left or right. You can't really go forward or backwards, but what's going to happen is you got this tube just like this, and there's a vacuum breaker, which is this little guy right here. It's just goofy, and it just sits right down in there, just like that. All right, sits in there. Like, let's say, all right, now we got it all back in there, and your valve is still sitting here. Okay, now we're going to take and turn the valve back. Now you may have to fight it a little bit to get it back in place, because now you've got this taking up all this gap. But now you're going to be like this, and see how all in here around here you got this blue. This blue is supposed to expand up against these holes to keep the water from escaping. And once you do that, you're going to take it, you can kind of work the cylinder back up. And then you also notice you got this little shield right here too on this piece right here. All this does is just keep the water, when the water does escape, keeps it from spraying straight out onto the walls. It allows it just to run straight down and puddle, instead of just spraying everywhere in the wall and causing other problems, or spraying on other electrical parts that may short out and cause issues. All right. So then once you get that all back, then you'll take your goofy pliers or whatever plier you want to use. You'll snug it down. You don't have to manhandle it or anything like that. You just got to snug it down pretty good. And then you're going to want to go back, and you're going to want to tighten this back down. Now you're going to want to snug this down pretty good. You don't have to manhandle it, but snug it down tight. Okay, once that's all done, now you can turn your water back on and flush it. And at that point, the water should no longer be running out from down here. Now, what does happen? Okay, now this is another thing you want to look for while you're, let's say when you're replacing your vacuum breaker. Okay, so these vacuum breakers, let's say you got one that's been in there for 6 or 7 years, right? For a long time. let's say this is back up, right? I'm just gonna set it aside. These vacuum breakers, sometimes these around the edge here get stuck to the inside of this tube, right? It'll get stuck in there, and you may finally get a screwdriver, get that thing pried out of there just like that, right? And set that aside and toss a new one and put a new one in. Well, what ends up happening is sometimes if you're not careful, when you replace that vacuum breaker, always run your finger in there. Just kind of run it around in there and make sure none of this came off and is broke and stuck to the side of the tube. Because if you put a new one in on top of that and you stack that rubber, what's going to happen is that water's still going to seep by. Every time you flush it, it's going to seep by and blow back out. So you got to make sure the inside of that's clean, all right? And then you can put that back down in there and then go, and you're good to go. So put it all back together just like so. Like I said, it's fairly simple. The only part that makes it difficult is how it's set up in your wall. Because sometimes you got very good accessible panels where you can get to them, and sometimes they're not very accessible. So it all depends on your setup. All right, guys, so that is how you change a vacuum breaker in a Toto hidden or concealed valve. And like I said, it's pretty easy. All in all, it's pretty quick. Usually, I mean, with me, as I've done through the years, I can usually have one knocked out in probably about 5 or 6 minutes, okay? It just takes a little bit of time. Sometimes you can only get one hand in there to work, and it's tricky. Now, I know urinals have the same thing, okay? Now, I know urinals in our building in particular, they're a little harder to get to because you can't see them directly. We have an access panel, but the valve, like I say, the access panel is here, but the valve is over here. So you're kind of I have to work with one hand here, and then I have another hand going through where the button is and the sensor is. I'll pull the sensor stuff out and I'll put my hand in and I'll work with it like that. So it does make it a little harder to work with sometimes on urinals. But like I said, the hardest part all comes in depending on your setup and how it's set up and how the access is to them in your building. So that is it, guys. I hope that was easy enough for you. If you have any questions, comments, comment below. Don't argue, don't fight. Until next time.